Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Now, before we do fully begin, a bit about Excitech. So, yeah, been operating in the construction industry for over 30 years now. Predominantly known, I suppose, for our platinum partnership with Autodesk as a platinum reseller. But again, much beyond that. We offer services in training, consultancy, document management, IT, facilities management, and really can support any project from conceptual all the way through to owner operator, not just the handover, but actually the continued ongoing maintenance of the building. And for those of you who do visit our website, you may well notice a lot of animal imagery throughout our new branding. This is essentially represents a partnership we share with customers. From feedback, we have close relationships with a lot of our customers, and we really do see ourselves as partners as opposed to just a reseller, as it were. So, moving on. Right, I'll pass over to my colleague Geoff Alder now, who'll be leading the main session. And he'll be running through the main event today. So, Geoff, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Billy. Just an introduction from myself then. My name's Geoff. I tend to deal with much of the visualization here at Excitech, which is involving workflows between AutoCAD, Revit, 3D Studio Max, and various other softwares we use. And for this little exercise today, I would like us to have a little bit of an introduction for interior designers into V-Ray. So very, very quickly, that's all about me. I've been working in AutoCAD since the early 80s, and so I've been around a little while, and we've worked with a lot of that great software. That's all about me at the moment. Let's actually get started. I'm going to actually look at the way that we work with the workflow for the AEC collection. What's happened recently is that a lot of clients have come to me and said, well, I've got this AEC collection and I know Revit, but I don't know what this Max is. And so others have said, well, I've got the AEC collection and I understand 3D Studio Max, but what's this Revit now? And a lot of interior designers are saying, well, is the Revit useful to us? And I'm saying, of course it's useful. And so therefore, I want to have a look, a little bit of a collection of softwares here so that I can run through with you some simple workflows. What I'll show you now was actually a part of a class development I did a few weeks ago. So it's actually quite real, and we had real people having issues. So I'm going to come up to my AutoCAD here. I'm using AutoCAD 2019 here. And I'm just going to show you a very simple drawing that we created. This particular drawing was just an example of a DWG that exists. Now, what I wanted to do was just have a class where we were looking at existing data. Many interior designers say, well, I've got a CAD model or I've got a CAD drawing. Do I put it into Revit? Do I put it straight into 3D Studio Max? Or what can I do with it? Well, the simple answer is we could go both ways. We can either take it into Revit or into 3D Studio Max. A lot of interior designers have been using their AutoCAD to put it into 3D Studio Max. But what I did, because of the AEC collection, was introduce our interior designers into the idea of using Revit. So what I want to do is do that little exercise for us as well. So if I just jump over to my Revit here, and I just created an entirely new little Revit project. I just use this architectural template here. Here we have a simple Revit scene, a Revit project started. It's just a level 0 there, nothing in there of any substance. I've done nothing special because all I really want to do was actually import or insert here. I can come over to insert here and insert at level 0 import a CAD drawing. Now, a lot of the interior designers have said to me they don't understand any of all of this, and I said, well, that's no problem at all. All we're really looking at is a nice workflow. So I'm going to click on an import CAD here. If I then move over to where I've actually saved some of our work for our presentation, I've got an interior workflow plan. That's the one I've just been showing you on AutoCAD here. So I can import that straight into Revit to give me a little bit of a guideline. This is the DWG, and I'm going to just say I don't really need to preserve the colors because it's going to come straight in. I tend to tell it what I want to import it in as millimeters. I can bring it in at this view at the moment, no problem at all. So essentially, I'm bringing the origin to origin. The issue here really is that I'm just basically bringing in my AutoCAD drawing into Revit. This is coming in origin to origin, and my origin was just here. So for this exercise, I just moved the elevation markers out the way, just so that we can see what I'm up against here. So in its simplest form, I just bring this model in here. Now, if I come over to my View tab here, we can actually look at the visibility, what they call visibility graphics here. And essentially, just like an external reference, we'll actually have the way we structure a Revit model, but for our purposes, I just want to jump all over here to the imported categories, just to say that the drawing that I've actually just imported, I can actually look into the layers and turn off some layers in there as well. So that's essentially what I'm using. It's like an external reference. So I'll click on OK there. So with the work with our work with this model here, I want to create some of the core geometry that's going to go into 3D Studio Max, and that's just the walls and floors and ceilings and things like this. A lot of the content I tend to make in 3D Studio Max anyway. So one of the areas I'd like us to look at here is actually just to say, okay, well, I'll just measure between, say, for example, I'll just measure between here and here, and I can see now that my wall is 290. So what I'd like us to do just to start off is to actually create some simple walls. Now if I click on the wall parameters here, I've got the wall feature over here, you can see that I've got some classic wall properties here. If I click on the down arrow here, we've got a lot of parameters here of predefined families or system families of walls. So what I want us to do is actually just basically utilize this sketch here that I got from AutoCAD and bring it into this model. So what I'm going to do here is just say, looking at the way that the wall is created, I'm going to just say its height, and I'm going to say it's going to go up to level 1. But here I'm just going to say I'm going to actually place this basically finish face exterior, something like that. So I can click on the pick lines. Now simply what I'm doing here is just creating a wall based on that AutoCAD drawing. So if I approach this from the outside, it gives us a dotted line there on the wall side. So I do the same on this one here. I can do the same all the way up here, for example, like that. Now I've only just picked some of the walls here that are representing the place that the wall is in. So I then can use actually like a little fillet command here, and I could actually select this wall here and that one, fillet those two together, that one there and that one there. So creating the walls over here is pretty straightforward. I'm just using that wall feature. If I just click on the 3D view here, you can see that I've got some features here. Let me just hide in view that category out the way there. So essentially I've just got some wall features come in here, and that's straightforward, the walls. However, if I look at the wall section here, we can see that the wall itself is actually quite a comprehensive section of wall. So if I clicked on edit type here and understand that the wall type is how it's built. And if I click on the edit to see the structure of the wall, I can actually see this is quite a comprehensive wall structure. I'll bear that in mind for a moment, because what I'd like to do now is actually come over here, and if I open in good old traditional Blue Peter style, one that I've done earlier, this interior workflow model here. Essentially, this is what I've just done with this model. I brought in all of that geometry and created some features in here. So this one is actually a model that we were going to work on. It's a simple model we worked in class, and here we got this the model come in. Now, once again, this actually could be a Revit model that you've got from a designer. And what I'm what I'm getting at is, if I select a wall, or say this floor, for example, I could select the floor here, and as I'm an interior designer, I don't necessarily need to have this entire structure of floor in my model. So if I clicked on the edit type of this floor, you can see that this is floor is quite comprehensive floor. It has a finish of concrete, membranes, and air layer, and structure, and so on. So what I tend to do is actually duplicate this, duplicate this system floor, for example, and I'm just going to make that as my concrete base or something like this. And I'm just going to say for my viz underscore, and that is giving me a thickness of 480 there. So I'm just going to say 480 like that. So if I click on OK there, I basically created a new wall. So if I edit this, what I would actually do is just make this 480 and take away this, take away this one, take away this one, take away this one, and this one. So all I've got is essentially basically a floor there. I can leave that concrete material on even there, or indeed take that away if I wanted to. Take away and just make that a default material. Doesn't really matter for me at the moment. But if I keep that, that means that that little bit of geometry there is simplified. It's just a floor base. Now, for our interior design, that's all I need. This will show up in a second when I look at the model in 3D Studio Max, and this will be a benefit. So, essentially, a lot of this is done in 3D Studio. It's done in Revit, and we've used a drawing from AutoCAD as a bit of a template. What I'd like to look at then, if I actually just finish off here, I can then just close this one. I could save that actually. If I come back to, if I open another one here, like I said, Blue Peter style, one I've been optimizing. Essentially, it's the very same file, but I basically look towards changing, optimizing the wall, the floors, and also I placed in a secondary floor in here. So in here, I've got a secondary floor I placed in here. So I've got a small little family I put in here. I've just called it floor wood block. If I looked at that, edited that type, it's a very simple wood block floor. There's nothing in there. It's actually just a 30mm floor. And I placed that in the scene. And I bounded it round here for the reception area. And I've just made it an offset of 30. So it actually sits on top of this model. Okay, so there we have the basics of the geometry coming into Revit. So we've used an AutoCAD drawing. So for those that are using AutoCAD, don't know Revit, the process is really simple. And this is actually a class I did, so I'm quite happy that this worked very well. Okay, so what I want us to look at now is actually bringing this over into 3D Studio Max. If I start up, bring over 3D Studio Max, this essentially is the render that I did of our scene. I'm not necessarily an interior designer myself, so I don't understand things like this looks beautiful or not. It was just for me to give us an idea to change some of the materials, add in different textures, and actually look at some of the V-Ray materials in here. So I'll just minimize that for a moment. What I did think about here to show you was that if I just, I'll just come to Revit here for a second. Let me just close that one, because I don't want to have too many software open here because I'm guaranteed to crash. So I'm just going to close AutoCAD there. So now while I come over to 3D Studio Max, we can bring in, or I can think about importing that geometry into Max. So if I come to our file, to an import here, if I click on an import here, very straightforward importing geometry into Max. If I come down here then, and let's go and find my my work here. So I've got interior workflow here. So if I import my geometry into here, so I've got my interior workflow model here and the optimized model here. Let me first just bring in the interior workflow model that hasn't been optimized. In other words, it's the one that I haven't changed the wall and the floors to a simple design. So let me click on open there for a second. And this is, like I said, this is running real time. So it's thinking about it on my machine. Okay, here we have the import settings for bringing in a Revit model into 3D Studio Max. What I'd like to do is bring in the selected view. It doesn't really matter because I've got 3 views here. I can select the 3D view here, and that's fine. I've got materials, cameras. I also have the daylight system that is in Revit. We've got lights that are Revit, RPCs, real photographic content, and if I wanted to export any BIM info. To be honest, a lot of this, things like the daylight system, and indeed materials, but daylight system and lights, because I'm going to look at V-Ray, I can just bring all that in or edit that in 3D Studio Max. If you're creating any curved geometry, then we'd need to just adjust this. Sometimes it changes the tessellation here. I did a recent demonstration and VR presentation, and bringing the geometry in from Revit required that I had to make this curved geometry a lot more refined because there was some very thick columns in the building, and I wanted them to be actually quite nice. So I'm going to just look at those parameters here. If I just click on OK and import that into here. So essentially I've got this comes into the scene here. This is a simple Revit model here. There's the cameras that we brought in. If I look at this camera here, which is the one called Lobby Cam, for example, come down to here, look at my cameras. Let's have it say, look through my Lobby Cam. This will be the scene I want to render. So that's the camera coming out of Revit. So let me just come to a perspective view here and see what we're up against. Now, a moment ago I mentioned that within Revit you've got quite a comprehensive structure for the walls and for the floor. So what I've done here, if I've just brought in an unoptimized model, if I just click on here at the moment to bring in the materials editor. I don't know if anybody's using the materials editor a lot, and the mode I want us to use the slate material editor. For those that are utilizing 3D Studio Max, if they understand 3D Studio Max, I I greatly recommend that you start to consider using the Slate Material Editor. A lot of folks in interior design have said they stay with the classic mode, but if in order to understand materials and the way the material structures are working within Max and other programs like image manipulation software, like what would we say? Let's say something like Substance Designer. If we have a node-based concept, so this works very well with that. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm just going to click on the little pipette up here so that I can actually select a material from the model. So if I click on the floor there in my my model, I've got a structure of the floor. Now actually this floor is okay, to be honest. Let me just pipette this other one up here. I don't know if I just brought the right one in actually, but not to worry. If I pipette up here, the wall, there we go. So in other words, I haven't optimized the wall, and what happens is that because the Revit model was not optimized, it will bring in a lot of information that we don't necessarily need for our interior design. For example, this particular wall, whilst I've got plaster here and brick and the default interior, I've got actually using 3 multi-sub objects. Don't necessarily need all of that to come in. What I tend to do is like to try to keep geometry low, which means I bring textures low, lighting, and everything like that. All adds to optimizing my model for final render. So I'm just going to close that for a second here. So that model essentially is fine, but we can optimize it, like I said, in Revit a lot more. So let me just reset here. I won't save that for a second. So if I then come over to import again, I can click on import here, and there's my Revit model that I've optimized. So let's bring him in here. And I do the same in here. Just import that in here. So exactly the same thing in here. So if I come into here, like I said, we've optimized this. So I look at my materials editor and do any pipette up any other materials. Actually, that's the same material there. Sorry about that. So I could optimize those materials. That is a useful way forward. Okay, so the next area I like to look at within 3D Studio Max, if I was to just reset here, I'm not going to save that. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to open this model here that I've been working on. This is the model that we got from Revit. But what I did do is actually adjust this to suit V-Ray. So for a few moments here, let me look at understanding V-Ray in here. A lot of interior designers are using V-Ray, and I think it's quite an excellent tool. Autodesk has another product, which is Arnold, on here as well, on 3D Studio Max. So Arnold exists as a renderer, and I think also it's a very, very good renderer, actually. But interior designers are tending to use V-Ray. So I wanted just to introduce a little bit of V-Ray into our webinar today. So just to make sure that I'm working on V-Ray, I'm going to come to V-Ray render setup here and just make sure that I'm using V-Ray. I'm using the V-Ray Next, which is most recent V-Ray. And so what I'd like us to look at is some of the ways that we can create geometry and textures. So what I've done here, if I come back to this area here, what we can do here, once again, I can use the pipette tool up here. So for example, I can click on the pipette and I can select this wall, or let's say the floor here. This is the new material I built for the floor. So if I show you how I built this material, this is straightforward material out of V-Ray. So it's a great material, and that the way that works is that I can come down to my materials here, and for those that haven't used V-Ray, we've got V-Ray materials here, and the classic V-Ray material just here. V-Ray material, where's it gone? V-Ray. Sorry, just V-Ray material here. If I drag in V-Ray material here into our scene here, this is a V-Ray material. If I change this name, for example, give it a name and call it floor or something like this. This is a classic floor. Now, what we have here with the material is we can have a diffuse map, reflection, refraction in here. So what I'll do is actually put this onto here, plug that straight onto my floor. So there's the floor material. Just delete this out of the way for a second just to show what I'm up against. So this is a simple V-Ray material for the floor. The parameters and shader values of the material are listed down here. So for example, the basic parameters, the diffuse, color, the reflectivity, the refraction here, which we'll have a look at in a second. If I want to place a map on here, and I've got some general maps here, we've got a lot of procedural maps here, but for our exercise here, I'll just drag over and pop in here a bitmap on here, a bitmap there. As soon as I put the bitmap into the material editor, we need to go and find the bitmap that I've been using. So let's come to Windows here, interior workflow. I actually use this material here, so this stone one here, this stone material, I'll pop that on there. So that material now, I can just plug that straight into the diffuse value. So you can see that as a structure, this works, and the workflow is a lot easier. It's the material goes into the diffuse, and that's what it's giving me here. If I right click on here, we could open the preview window here, for example, and see that material. So that material now is onto our floor, but we can't see it at the moment. I don't see it on the floor. So what we'll have to do is two things. One, I need to put a UV map on the floor, because this is a tiled map. I need to put a tile-in coordinate system onto the geometry here. So if I select the geometry here, and come over to the modifier here, you can see I put on, I might just delete that for a second now, but if I put on a UVW map onto here, UVW map, like this, put a UVW map on here, and then we can change the parameters of that UVW map. And I tend to think about a lot of the maps, how big they are. A bit of a rule of thumb is that if I have maps that are 512 by 512, this particular map is actually 512 by 512. 512 by 512 pixels generally equates to a relatively nice render of a meter square or 800 to a meter. So what I'm going to do is change this map in here so that this length is, say, 800 and 800 and 800. So that gives me some mapping at 800 by 800. So if I just come back into here, this map here, I just click on over here just to show the map in the viewport. So this gives me an idea what the map is like in the viewport. I could actually also put another bitmap on here, and I then can place this bump map, in other words, like a grayscale image of the same map, and I could just pop that, plug that straight into the bump. One of the areas I do like to mention on this Slate Material Editor is that I can unplug a map like this and have several maps available. So I can plug in another map into here. Maybe this one would be a stone map, another one would be a carpet or something like this. I plug these in so that the client, I can say to the client, well, there you go, it's actually either a stone floor or carpet tiles, and it works very well like that. It's very easy to unplug and plug in there. So I'll pop that there, and like I said, if I then look at the open preview window here, we can start to see that we've got a little bit of texture going on here. The other thing is that with the V-Ray materials, I can then adjust the parameters of the V-Ray material. Now this, this will be with lots of your materials here, and in its simplest form, I can say I've got a diffuse color, but this diffuse color has a map in it, which is showing you M just there. The reflectivity and refractivity of an object are listed up here. So in its reflection here, if I have a slight reflection on here, I can click on the black there, and the reflection basically means black to a light reflection and down to white for fully reflective. If I just bring that down a little bit there, click on OK, and then the glossiness, because at the moment there is no glossiness, I really would like to see a little bit of glossiness there. If I did that at 0.9, for example, you would see that it's very glossy here. It looks like it's actually wet. So I could actually change that. If I kept moving that down, that would be more and more glossy. So what I want is it not necessarily to be overly glossy, like looking wet, but just to have a little bit of glossiness about it, so that the stone is not completely matte. So I'm going to go to 0.8 or something like that, maybe down lower 0.6, and then you can see that it just has a little bit of a sheen on it. So looking at those materials there, what I have there is to build up all these materials. So for example, if I just pipette up this other material, if I pipette up this material here, which is the glass, you'll see that I've actually created another material, which is open the preview window here, and I've got a rather nice glass material. Now with the glass, obviously we would have a diffuse. We can have a diffuse color. We don't have any texture in here. It's purely a shader. So I've got quite reflectivity here, and we've got quite glossiness here. So we've got those nice high specular levels in our glossy reflection on our glass. Refractivity is also, quite high. You can see straight through it. Index of refraction here. Because we're working in CGI, we can have an index of refraction, nicely higher and brighter than normal. So a normal glass is about 1.3 as an index of refraction, but I just push that up to 1.6 and so on, or you can experiment with that. So this is, the way I work with this. So basically we can get all of this together, and then I can place it. I placed in a sun system in here. If I come back over to here, I've just placed a sun system in here. We've got the camera, and also I put some lights in here. These are the V-Ray lights in here. So if I come back over to here, let's have a little render. So if I come over to V-Ray, my render setup here, just open up V-Ray render settings. Whoops. There we go. Here we go. So with the V-Ray render settings here, we got to, I don't want to go deep into it at the moment, but we can actually render quite nicely straight out the box with V-Ray at the moment. But here's the V-Ray parameters and the GI. With V-Ray, we can use several algorithms to achieve our goal, and this one is an irradiance and the light cache. There's a lot we could do here and please do come along for some training, because we can go through this. There's a lot of interior designers are thinking about this now. However, we can have some V-Ray quick settings, and one of this is quite nice now, that we can actually have settings for an exterior, interior, and there's one for visual effects and studio setups, and that will then change some of the parameters in here. So what I've done here is just very simple settings here. So if I'm going to click on render here now, hopefully this particular scene, I'll leave it rendering here real time for us, just to prove that actually it's not that outrageous to work with a render. It should be only a couple of minutes, so bear with me on this. I'll let this actually run. While it's actually running, I just mentioned that as I render here, we do actually have a lot of post-production features that are very useful within the render. So at the moment it's using a light cache, and what I've done with the scene is actually put a light cache in there and an irradiance map. And also in a minute I'll show you, but there's a concept that V-Ray have introduced called a denoiser. And if anybody does a lot of rendering, they obviously always want to look for quicker render times. Unfortunately, when you place in any geometry or render any lights that introduce any blur in, which would be things like shadows, of course, motion blur, even reflections and refractions, those type of things, they all introduce a blurring effect, and that puts a lot of processing time onto the render. So what we do also is have a concept called a denoiser. So the denoiser actually looks at surfaces like the flat walls, the floors, and creates a mask around there, and then would create a mask that we would use like a Gaussian or Gaussian blur on there just to clean that up. So this is my render. I've just put some wallpaper on here. That's That's the floor one I've just done here. I put a marble on the top here and this material here. This material over here, this one here, I left that on because that's actually a Revit material that I've used. But the rest of the materials I've actually just changed over into a V-Ray material. Even one of the areas that are very useful in this render now is these global parameters. Because this image is actually a 32-bit image, I can actually do some post editing in this, and that's through exposure control. I can turn on exposure control, and even, you know, adjust that quite significantly. So even if you've got the camera, your camera exposure is not looking too good, because it's a 32-bit, you know, floating point image, it's got the color depth to actually pull up exposure, and also we can adjust white balance in this here as well. So even though it's rendering, we can change those parameters, and then of course when it's done we can save out the image. If we do save out the image straight from here, it will actually adopt these processes if they are checked, and therefore the same in an animation. If you create an exposure and a white balance or any saturation or any global value here, then that would actually render out in the final production. So that's very useful. Over on this side, we do have some effects. I can actually put some effects in here. For example, very often people are wanting a bloom, you know, bloom effects on here. The bloom effect is a post effect, and it will actually happen on the final image. At the moment, it's just struggling on some glass there, as you can see. I'm not quite sure what's going on there actually. It's me messing around actually, so I'm actually gonna forgive me here. I'll stop this. So there we go. So let me just open that. So here we got the final render like this. So like I said, we could actually add in bloom and this type of effects here if you wish, and save out those images. Okay, so we've had a little bit of a fly through here, to be perfectly honest, on workflows. There's a lot of stuff going on here, and there's a lot of energy in all of the software I've used. But from an interior designer, it's a good idea to look at the AutoCAD, the Revit, 3D Studio Max, and V-Ray. So with that, I'll say thank you very much, and if there's any questions, I'm more than delighted to help out. If you've got any ideas about any other workflows within your interior design and you want me to have a look at it, more than welcome. Thank you very much indeed, folks. Thank you very much indeed.